Hello, YouTube, and welcome to a new series called Facts About Sex. We have a few new series. There's one about myths, there's one about facts, like today. There is a science series where we cover cool scientific articles that people have published and delve into the studies behind them. And then there's a sex ed. So since we've had almost everything already, next week is going to be sex ed. This week is going to be facts about sex. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the G-spot, because this has been a rather unagreed upon body part of women. If you just talk to people in swingers clubs, pretty much everybody knows that squirting is a real thing. I mean, you hang out long enough, you find out that yes, this happens. And everybody knows in this community that you need to stimulate the G-spot to be able to get somebody to squirt. It doesn't matter to these people whether it's real or not real according to science. They've been using it for ever. And so it's real to them. But strangely enough, science has lagged behind enormously here. So you may have heard reports that there is no such thing as a G-spot. You may have heard women say this, you may have heard men say this, you may have heard your gynecologist say this. It's time to fix this. So, as recently as 2009, so forever ago, 1989, there was a study which basically said, this is not a real thing, we're making it all up. It's just some figment of our imagination. So the G-spot doesn't exist, was their conclusion. Then a study from 2001 showed got to the exact same conclusion. So we didn't really get much further in the meantime. And then when you and then as recently as 2009, 2010 even, there was another study that again concludes that there is no such thing as a G-spot and we're making it all up. I've heard from colleagues of mine that had a similar experience, that didn't actually know if it was real or not, started asking around, and their gynecologist friends said, no, that's not real. That doesn't exist. That's just some nonsense that porn makes up. Then in 2012, they did a literature review of all the available evidence, and they concluded we don't have substantial evidence for the G-spot. But they did take a step towards reconciliation with the outside world, because they said, well, how can we ignore so much evidence to the contrary? Sure, we don't have scientific evidence, we don't have it proven in some kind of lab, but we have lots of anecdotal evidence, and people report using this spot. Maybe we should look a little harder. Maybe we just can't find it because we haven't bothered to look. Which I think is fabulous. That a researcher who are traditionally not that good at saying things like this, admitting that maybe they should look a little harder or try a little more, that they would say that. I think that's cool. Now, the evidence to show that it does exist. Recent studies. This is all recent. I don't get how it hasn't been properly studied before. There's one study you will continuously get when you Google. It's even made it to the Wikipedia page. It's a study from 2009 by doctors in Italy, and they found that when they were looking at people who self-reported were able to get to orgasm through just penetration, they found that these women had a somewhat different anatomy than women who didn't report this, who said, I can only come by clitoral stimulation. So they went and looked at the differences, and they found a very important difference between the two, namely that there was a slight, a thick area where everybody always said that the G-spot should live. They found this by doing ultrasounds. There was a distinct difference in this area between the people who could come from just penetration and the other women, leading them to conclude that there is such a thing as a G-spot and not every woman has it. Then there's a study from 2015 who basically showed that you don't just have the clit area, but there's way more. There's this whole structure that the clit is part of, and that structure kind of gets aroused and thick, just like a dick does. It's not necessarily 100% clear, but it could well be that the G-spot is part of this whole structure. And so then suddenly it makes a lot of sense that some women can come just from stimulating a different part of that same clitoral structure. I think the most recent research I found was from 2016, where they review how women can have different types of orgasm and how that could be. So suddenly, it seems like the past 10 years or so, suddenly science is going, maybe there's something to this whole G-spot thing. Maybe we should look a little harder. This is part of a long tradition in science of not really wanting to look at sexuality because it's not such a serious topic and people might laugh at you. For example, it took a long time for science to even consider that women might have an orgasm. It has nothing to do with the G-spot, just an orgasm in general. They didn't think that was a real thing. And then slowly they came around and started to actually consider that there might be such a thing as a female orgasm. And they started to consider that maybe you don't want to cut up the pussy or the dick, when you're doing surgery. In the beginning, they also piled the G-spot and female ejaculation in one big pile and said that doesn't exist. Surprisingly to me, more recent studies that are still claiming that the G-spot isn't real do seem to acknowledge that female ejaculation is a thing. So when I compare this with my own experience on the matter, I would have to agree with the later studies, which is astounding that it was only like as recent as 10 years ago-ish that science said, maybe it looks like there's actually something to this whole G-spot thing. I think it's cool that they finally found out. It's a little slow, but then, I'm also a little slow. And it took me well into my 30s to figure out that this was real. I had a threesome at some point with a couple, and she was a squirter, and he would show me how to stimulate the G-spot so that she would squirt. Not long after that, somebody else made me squirt for the first time. Then I started practicing so that I could do that to myself, and so that I could do it to other people. And I can pretty consistently do it to most of my partners, even if they've never squirted before. And whether you call it the G-spot or not, there is an area in your pussy that feels a little bit different and that you need to stimulate in a certain way so that you can get squirting. So there's definitely a spot there. I mean, whatever you want to call it, there's a spot there. It's a little thicker. When you get aroused, it gets thicker. And you can stimulate it. And it can feel good. And for some, it can lead to squirting. For some, it can lead to an orgasm. For some, both. I don't really need science to tell me what's true and what's not true. What is kind of sad about it, though, is that until science acknowledges it as a thing, you can't really go to the doctor and get taken serious. Maybe you've been squirting all your life and suddenly you can't squirt. How are you gonna ask? I mean, a lot of people get nervous enough already when it comes to sexuality and doctors. If this doctor is gonna outright tell you, look, that doesn't exist, there's no medical evidence for this spot, then what are you gonna do? I would really hope that most of the next generation of gynecologists, of sexuologists, of even just general doctors would get educated and would keep an open mind when there's something on their plate that they've never heard of before or that they personally don't really believe in. A conclusion on our fact: the G-spot's real. Whatever you want to call it, there is a spot right there, and it gets some women to orgasm and some women to squirt, and some both. There is such a thing as a G-spot. And whatever we call it, it doesn't really matter. So that does it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I will see you tomorrow in my vlog to talk about our schedule. See you. Bye.